right? And, you know, I say this with all the Lacanian implications, right? It becomes the big other, right? That then structures all of our other others, which would be concrete, for those of you not familiar with Lacan, which would be the concrete people around us, right? And so you get garbage like, you know, I need to recognize the otherness, the absolute infinite alterity of the other in their face, and their demand upon me, right? But of course all of this is just, it's just garbage sutured to, right, the inconsistency of being.
Right. So,
everyone likes Levinas. For you.
He's my grandfather.
Who did you get it for?
hey man.
No, I'm just kidding.
And this is why Jim Faulkner wasn't interested in coming. He's a Lebanese. But a good friend of mine. But we argue about Levinas.
As all philosophers who are also enemies are friends.
So, yeah, so it seems to generate an aporia. Levinas says, let's embrace that aporia and sneak God back in the equation. Whereas Badiou saying that it's actually a false aporia. Because the way what Levinas is ultimately trying to do is actually he's doing phenomenology. He's trying to think this through this retroactive mood. It's the face of this other who's actually appearing to me right now in my presence. And that has somehow a kind of halo around it that betrays the inconsistent big other. And so forth. But Badiou's saying we don't need to do that. Mathematics is ontology, which means mathematics has a way of thinking pure, inconsistent multiplicity.
Would you say then that part of the problem that Levinas runs into is he's still kind of sutured to poetry the way that Heidegger was? So it's only this proximity, and it never allows you to understand what the face is saying and things like this. This is why mathematics can actually give us.
I would say that, but I've read too much Levinas. Levinas, as a very, very orthodox Jew, he was extremely orthodox. Wrote essays, philosophical essays, arguing how all art is idolatry, and so it has an echo, if you will, of Heidegger's way of handling art. But Levinas translates that into terms of love. At the end of the whole last part of Totality and Infinity, called Beyond the Face. He articulates a kind of philosophy of love, an amorous philosophy. So if anything, I think he's actually suturing philosophy to love.
Okay, no, that actually makes sense. Then I've heard that.
And to be fair, you could just have a catastrophic, terrible ontology.
Yeah.
Which is how I read it.
Well, and he doesn't think he has an ontology. That's precisely the problem.
Yeah.
He says that this is actually a way of getting rid of the problem of being, and that Heidegger was wrong to raise the problem of being. So.
Well, also there would be like no truth in love, which doesn't allow
That's right.
the aporia to be
and Levinas states that explicitly. Truth is derived from love for him. There would be no truth of love. Couldn't even talk that way for him. He explicitly states that in Totality. So,
just really quick.
Yeah, please.
So this is on 24. He says he's talking about a structure. So this is bottom of the page, not quite bottom. A structure allows a number to occur within a presented multiple. Does this mean that the multiple as a figure of presentation is not yet a number? One must not forget that every situation is structured. The multiple is retroactively legible therein as anterior to the one, insofar as the count as one is always a result. The fact that the one is an operation allows us to say that the domain of the operation is not one, in parentheses, for the one is not. And therefore, this domain is multiple, since within presentations, what is not one is necessarily multiple. In other words, the count as one, the structure, installs the universal pertinence of the one/multiple couple for any situation.
That's right.
So
numbers always fall on the side of consistent multiplicity.
Yeah, I think, isn't that what you meant, Greg, by saying aperture? Just like the one comes, okay.
Retroactively. I mean...
So, in other words, when we can talk about multiples here, but when we talk about multiples here, I mean something like the set of the chairs in this room, right? And I can count them, and there are this many denumerable chairs involved, but these have already been counted as one. So when we're talking about multiplicity here, yeah, the idea is trying to get across there is, don't think of this as a number of things over here. Number always falls on the side of consistent multiplicity. Okay. Instead, you've got to think here of multiples, of multiples, of multiples, of multiples that proliferate to infinity.
Where does that fall on?
That's what's on this side, and that's the thought of ontology. Ontology thinks pure multiplicity.
And we were saying that those were axioms and.
Yeah, we'll get to the question of axioms, but yeah, the way that mathematics does that is through an axiomatic decision.
He uses, I mean, he makes the distinction like, I'm not using Cantor's set theory because there's too much contradictions in it, whatever. He goes to the Zermelo framework because it is axiomatic.
Correct.
Well, and again, the important thing, as I see it, and I think this is perhaps a little bit of the essence of my mistake, is, right, set theory itself, because it is ontology, and it is pure ontology, can also be denumerated qua sets. For example, you could have the set of axioms in set theory, right? And so what happens is the axioms are not then these external mystical one that then set everything in motion, but are, and this is what makes Badiou a materialist rather than an idealist, is that the axioms themselves are always subject to the various procedures of themselves and can always be altered given new information.
Yeah.
And so they're not simply a dogmatic utopian, or sorry, I often go to the political language, but they're not a dogmatic idealist conception then forced on the entire theoretical apparatus, but rather a living materialist dialectical apparatus that is always subject to revision and change.
Yeah, that's right. And when we get to meditation 3 here in a little bit, Sermello and Frankel come up with the crucial axiom, the axiom of separation, that's going to allow this to be nothing but pure multiplicity. You can't think of sets as being on one ontological level and elements as being on another. This is the problem that Cantor himself has. We're getting ahead of ourselves in meditation 3 here. But Cantor thinks of sets as being, in some sense, a higher ontological order or something, and the elements as being of a lower ontological order. But here, these are sets of sets of sets of sets of sets of sets. It has no bottom, it has no top.
Do you feel like that's what he's getting at in Meditation 6 when he's talking about the difference between multiplicity that is excessive, uncountable, and things like that versus one that is countable? Is that what he's kind of... I mean, I know it's a little bit...
Meditation 6? I'm not sure what you're thinking of there.
Well, Aristotle...
The overly large numbers, or the large sets, right, that can't themselves be thought.
Well, I think the way that it's positioned is in a way of like the void, right? It's like...
Oh, okay.
Maybe it's too far ahead.
Yeah, let's handle it as we get there,
All right.
because it seems out of nowhere right now.
Sure.
So, is this clearish?
That distinction makes sense for that paragraph, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on this idea of inconsistent being a retroactively discernible before, that ontology has the task of thinking, it's pure multiplicity, the operation of oneness that counts as one renders it consistent, or if you will, structured, represents what is presented, and hence we have appearance, numbers, everything, and we're of course always over there.
I'm so much clearer than when we started.
Okay, good.
So good.
Okay, so let's take this a step or two further. What do I want to do next after that? Okay. We've got presentation and presentation. I mean, to speak of ontology is to speak of the presentation of presentation, which is to say we're dealing with multiples and multiples. We've already made that point earlier. So, so let's deal with this. These two crucial axioms on page 29. Or prerequisites, sorry. I should call them axioms. So, he says, this is right at the top of page 29, the a priori requirement imposed by this difficulty may be summarized in two theses, prerequisites for any possible ontology, where ontology is going to be presentation of presentation, hence the thinking of multiplicity as pure multiplicity, multiples and multiples. So the first of these prerequisites, 1, the multiple from which ontology makes up its situation is composed solely of multiplicities. We've already pointed this out. There is no one. The one is not. In other words, every multiple is a multiple of multiples. That point I hope is clear already at this point. 2, the count as one is no more than the system of conditions through which the multiple can be recognized as multiple. And so here we've got the two halves, if you will. Pure multiplicity on the one hand, prerequisite number 1. And the prerequisite number 2 is going to be that it's the count as one that allows us to experience multiples in any way, and hence as multiple.
And this would be the axiomatic presentation.
This is what calls for an axiomatic, correct? As he goes on to say, the second requirement is extreme. What it actually means is that what ontology counts as one is not a multiple in the sense in which ontology would possess an explicit operator for gathering into one of the multiple, the definition of the multiple equals 1. No, what is required is that the operational structure of ontology discern the multiple without having to make a one out of it. And therefore without possessing a definition of the multiple. It cannot be experiential, can't be derivative, It can't be descriptive. It has to be prescriptive, axiomatic. Otherwise, it's always only here. And so ontology has to be a prescriptive and hence axiomatic endeavor. And specifically, those axioms have to prohibit consistency in what they're thinking. They have to guard the inconsistency of what is being taught.
Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Where is it that he's saying this? It's on page 30.